Welcome to the Academy, where we discuss and seek a change in long-term athletic development. My name is Ben Wellenbach, and I am the dad of two girls, strength coach, and owner of Be Well Fitness. It is my desire to help educate and shift the way our current culture operates regarding long-term athletic development. Back in Boston in the late 90s, I met my first mentor, Mike Boyle. During my time there, I had the opportunity to meet a number of really good coaches. If Mike was the heart of the gym, these coaches were the lifeblood. Several years later, I noticed a new wave of coaches with Mike. It was like the facility was rebirthed. It had a new life, and our guest today was part of that, and in many ways is the future of their facility. He's coached hundreds of athletes and adults, hundreds of other coaches rolling out their system worldwide, and written a book. As I do with every guest on the podcast, I will pair each guest with a sneaker from the Nike collection that best represents them. The Nike Free X Metcon is a combination of its name, the Free and Metcon. It gives you the flexibility and feel of Free with the stability and durability of the Metcon. This was one of the first models to blend technologies seeking to raise the standards of performance. This is exactly what Kevin did and continues to do in our industry. I chose the black and crimson colorway as those are the colors of both Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning and Certified Functional Strength Coach. So Kevin, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to share some lessons learned for long-term athletic development.
Thank you for the intro. And that was the shoe I was just wearing when I worked out right before this. So it was good selection by you.
Oh my God, that is hilarious.
You nailed it.
That is
no,
hilarious.
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to come on and talk.
Yeah, it is. As I was searching for the right shoe for you, I was kind of remembering that particular model. And I'm kind of bummed that they don't make it anymore. It's been years.
Yeah.
So, well, let's start in the beginning. Tell me a bit about your childhood growing up. Where did you grow up? What did sports play a role in your life? And, was it structured? Was it unstructured? What did you do?
Yeah. So I grew up probably 45 minutes from the gym. We're based in Woburn, Massachusetts. I grew up in Maynard, Mass, so just a little bit west. It's central Massachusetts, as it would be. And I played everything. Like a lot of kids, I played, in the fall, I played football. I played hockey and basketball when I was young. I did track and field and baseball. When I got into high school, I really narrowed it into football and track and field. But yeah, we were always playing something my entire life. And, like a lot of people in this field who get into strength and conditioning, it's usually because of an experience in sports. And like many people, it starts with an injury. So like I had a posterior labral tear in a repair when I was, like 16 years old when I was playing football. And I had to get a repair. And I had a great experience with physical therapy, actually. I had a great young physical therapist who really did a great job with my rehab. And in that experience, I really got into strength and conditioning because in the fall, I'd do non-contact for football. So what I would do is I would do the non-contact drills, and then I would go down in the weight room and I would lift. And we had a guy who was the throwing coach at Maynard High School who really taught us all the fundamentals of lifting. He taught us the squat, he taught us the deadlift, he taught us the bench. And so I got into lifting in this tiny little weight room that's probably as big as this treatment room that I'm in right now. And I really started to get into lifting, and I started to go to Gold's Gym. My parents were avid exercisers. I always say, and I wrote in the book I have coming up, I said, I got into this because of them. Because my dad was the type of guy, he was a 5 a.m. gym guy. He'd be out the door, before I got out of bed and go to Gold's before work. My mom would do the exercise tapes in the basement. And so it was always just kind of a cultural thing in my family. So I started going to the gym with my dad before school. And I got into training that way. And I had my sights set on, kinesiology going right into my freshman year of college. I knew at UMass that's what I wanted to do. And with the idea that I was probably going to try to go to physical therapy school until I stumbled on Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning after my freshman year. I was lucky enough that I was at Gold's Gym, working the front desk so I could have a free membership at the gym. It was like a little hack for me. I was like, I'll make a little money, be able to work out for free. And there was this guy that was a private contractor there. And I always thank him. His name's Clark Evans. He was a private contractor at Gold's. And I look over and like, he's doing single leg deadlifts and he's doing single leg squats and he's hang cleaning at Gold's Gym in 2005. And I'm thinking, like, I've never really seen any of this. My idea of a workout program at that time was like, what did Jay Cutler do? In muscle and fitness. And I'd do the machine circuit and I'd bench and like that and maybe squat. And then, he was like, hey, come work out with me. So I worked out with him. And it was unlike anything I'd ever done. And I remember asking him, like, hey, where did you learn to do this? And I told him I was going into my freshman year. I was in my freshman year of college. And he said, I did a mentorship with Mike Boyle at Boston University and at his gym. He was telling me who Mike was. I had no idea who Mike was. And he's like, you should look into, like, they have internship programs. And so I applied for the internship during my freshman year of college and I got it. So I interned very early in my, experience in kinesiology. And that completely changed my worldview, one, on what I wanted to do, and what my career would be like. Into it, I thought I'd be, willing to work in a PT clinic. And then I saw what this world of sports performance and rehab within sports performance looked like. And my world kind of changed overnight. And I've been here since. So that was 2008 that I interned. And, I've been here since now in 2025. So, I mean, it really started with sports and going through that rehab process and then getting into strength training. Like, I think a lot of people probably have similar stories. But I was fortunate enough that MBSC was a driving distance from my house. And so, that's how the career began.
That's awesome. Which Gold's Gym? Was it in Concord?
No, but it was owned by the same people. It was in Maynard, Massachusetts. So it was
Okay.
actually the same owners. Arlington, Concord, South Boston, and Maynard was the same group. So I
Okay.
actually went there. I did work in Concord a little bit, but mainly Maynard.
Yeah, because I went to the one in Concord. I lived in Acton.
Yeah.
So
Right over
that
the line.
was, yeah, I mean, it was the closest one, where the Valley Ice
Yeah,
arena is in
that's where
Concord.
that's where I learned to ice skate. Yeah.
It was the closest one to that.
Yep.
So, all right, well, in that, you brought up a bunch of stuff, and I just want to kind of tap into a couple things. One, you talked about using the injury as a bit of a motivator for you. And I guess I want to kind of ask something around that because, we're seeing, and I know that, you guys too, that kids are becoming more and more injured earlier and earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is overuse injuries. What would your message be to, let's say, the athlete, the player, the parent, based on your experience from an injury standpoint, for them moving forward?
Yeah. Like you said, you're seeing injuries come up that you used to only see in older athletes, more and more common in kids who are in, high school or middle school, even as a result of really high volumes of play, largely because of like the privatization of sports. And when you have injuries like this, I think it can be an eye opener for both the player and the parent to stop and take a step back and say, like, hey, is what we're currently doing the best thing for your long-term development?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to realize that with club sports and the privatization of sports, their number one objection is to make money. And they're always going to tell you that you need to play on this team, you need to go to this tournament, you need to go to this showcase because it suits them. And, I think we have this survivorship bias where there's some kids who get through this and they have a professional career and they're successful and they're healthy. And that for every kid that goes through it unscathed, there's a lot of kids who get hurt or are burnt out from the experience. And so you have to sit and look and say, okay, hey, what teams and tournaments do I have to participate in? And which ones can I probably not participate in? And then more importantly, what do I need to do to prepare for the volumes of play that I'm actually participating in right now? Because I can tell you from my perspective, our middle school program is busier than it has ever been. But it's a result of the fact that these kids need to prepare more at their level than they ever have in years prior. Because if you look at the schedule of like a middle school hockey player who plays on all these club teams year round, they play more games than an NHL player does, but they don't have the lifestyle support. They don't have the training. They don't have the physical development and robustness to deal with these stresses of constantly playing the sport all the time. And so I think as a parent and as a kid who's participating, you have to say, hey, what are realistically the things I need to do to be able to continue to compete at this level long term? And then where do I maybe need to take a step back to ensure that I'm actually getting bigger, faster, stronger, and healthier while still also improving my skill set along the way? And it can be tough because I think parents, they always feel like they got to keep up with the Joneses. They say, well, this kid's doing this, these kids are doing that, but you are your own individual athlete. And so what you might be able to tolerate from a training stress standpoint and a competition stress standpoint might be different than the other kids that you're playing with. And you need to take a realistic look because your path might be different than those around you. You could probably very well likely end up in the same place. And so you got to really look out what's best for you.
Maybe even a better place, quite frankly.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up in that answer, you brought up parents a couple times, and that was one of the things that I wanted to touch on in your own story too, because one of the conversations I was actually having with Mike when I had him on the podcast was about culture and environment, and you said that your parents exercising, your parents being models for you, it was almost like that was what was normal.
Mhm.
You wake up, you brush your teeth, like that was normal for you. I guess a message, you're now a parent as well to two kids, and how important do you think a parent's influence is as a role model and culture for their kids?
Yeah. I mean, we are the environment that we're surrounded in, right? And so the behavior you have, rises or falls to the level of the people you're surrounded with, and that is immediately your family. And so, I think as a parent, you have to think like, hey, what are the behaviors I want my kid to have? And then take a look at yourself and say, hey, well, what am I doing to model it for them? Because whether or not you know it, they're always watching what that is. And I understand I have a 3-year old and a 1-year old. Your time is as compressed as ever. It's harder and harder to exercise and do these things when you have a job, a business, and you have a family to take care of. But truthfully, I'm I am better about my exercise habits now than I really ever have been since I've had kids, mainly because that's my number one motivator is one, my health, to be there for them, you know, years and years and years down the line, but then also to be a model for them for the behaviors that I think are important. And so you have to continually think like, what is the message that I'm sending to them from a health standpoint, from a nutrition or lifestyle, an exercise standpoint that they hopefully pick up on and carry with them into their life. Because I think 100% you see the parents we have here that come to the gym. We have a lot of multi-generation families. The parents come to exercise, the kids come to exercise. And the kids that are really committed and come all year round and really take the training seriously, it's you look at their parents who are in the adult groups and it's the same exact way.
Mm, yeah. I mean, it's such a solid observation and point because you know we have multiple generations in here as well, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking to myself, who are the more successful kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they're without a doubt it's a reflection of the parents that are in here and doing their thing too. So you somewhat alluded to this both with your parents, but also his name was Clark, right?
Yep.
I, one of my questions was, who were some of the most influential people in your development? So, I mean, Clark, obviously, your parents. I'm going to automatically, I think, put Mike in the mix, but your answer.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Mike and Clark for getting me here, but I think about when I interned, I always think like my Mount Rushmore, like the coaches that were here when I started, because I knew nothing. So you think about Nicole Rodriguez was my intern director along with Garnet Vamos. Nicole Rodriguez was hugely influential. And she went on to work with Exos. She works with the U.S. national soccer team. Garnet Vamos was a strength coach here and a strength coach at Everett High School for a really long time, runs a very successful program there. I had Devin McConnell was a first or second year coach here. Josh Bonnetal, who went on to work with the Chicago Bulls and the Purdue Boilermakers. Jamie Rodriguez, who went to Exos and was with the Rangers. Anthony Mirando, who was at BU Hockey. There's all these people kind of pieced together how I thought about training very early on. Kyle Holland and Dan Gableman, all of these people were kind of staff members here who were in their 20s. But I always think about how I coach is a kind of an amalgamation of every little thing that I picked up from each of them, how I run a group, how I communicate, how I think about building a program. Those things are still in the back of my head as the lessons I learned. And it goes to that kind of 20-year window idea that Mike used to always talk about. It's like, you don't know who any of these people are going to be, 20 years down from the line. And now I look, what was that, 16, 17 years ago? And I'm like, wow, well, these people, one, have gone on to great things. I was very fortunate to have them as people kind of teaching me and leading me the way early on in my career.
I mean, it's a pretty solid group. That was kind of a wave that I missed, because were you and Marco and Larrabee, and that was like all around the same time, right?
Yeah, those guys came in. So I was 2008 summer. They all came in 2009, like during the year. So when I came back in the summer, they were all had interned kind of in the time while I was back at school. And so we were all kind of right around the same time getting started here in the business together.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
And that was a real pivotal time kind of in MBSC in general. It's funny, Mike actually did on MBSC TV, for those of you who are listening, and you can see all of our staff meetings, Mike did a history of MBSC presentation, because you realize we have a lot of staff members who, they were born in, the early 2000s, right? And so Mike went back to like the 80s to when he started BU and went all the way up to current day, and like how this business has changed. And that period is like right after somebody Mike had left and came back to MBSC. And this business, like you said, had been kind of reborn and regrown. And that generation, like of the coaches that were there just before me and us coming in, really were part of this group that kind of this business regrew itself and turned into what you see now, where it's not just sports performance, but it's personal training, it's adult fitness, it's physical therapy. And it really took off after that. And so those coaches really kind of laid the groundwork for us building the model that we have now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. All right, so long-term athletic development, LTAD, is quite the buzzword these days. It's responsible, for the early specialization versus diversified athlete concerns. So based on your experience with all levels, ages, experiences, what argument do you stand by?
I mean, the diversified athlete idea. I mean, when you look at the data of kids who specialize early, they turn into much well-rounded, healthier athletes long-term. They, from a psychological standpoint, they report higher levels of enjoyment in participating in their sport. They tend to develop more well-rounded, diversified athletic skill sets, and they tend to be healthier. And so, again, we're fighting this kind of battle where, the privatization of sports is pushing kids, at, age 10 to be like, hey, you're going to play hockey year round. And when I have parents who come into me and say, hey, my kid's a hockey player, I'd say, well, your kid he's a kid. And, what we want to look at is, take a 10,000 foot view of, what is their overall athletic participation like? And what can we have them do outside of the sport that the parent is probably very focused on? Because when you talk to the kids, they might be a hockey player, but they still love playing lacrosse, or they still love, playing soccer or whatever it might be, and trying to encourage them to still have that in them. And when you talk to you hear professional athletes, I saw a video with Gronk last week on a podcast where he said, continue to play every sport that you can. Don't listen to people who tell you to start to specialize early. I saw a video just the other day also of Nick Saban talking about recruiting Drake May to try to get him to come to Alabama, and him saying, I really was sold on him when I went to watch him play basketball, because one, I saw his overall athletic ability outside of just playing football. And I saw him being dedicated to a team, regardless of all the pressure of him to just be a quarterback. And then how he said he only recruits now, when he recruits defensive backs in college, he preferably recruits baseball players over track athletes, because he said track athletes are just fast, but there's no tracking a ball or quick decision making as it relates to playing the sport. Whereas sports like baseball, he said, although it might be boring, they're constantly making calculations of where to position themselves and how to track a ball and do those things. And he said those are athletic skills that are hard to teach if that kid is not playing a sport and then developing intrinsically over time. And so those are things that, parents and kids need to think about outside of saying, hey, I need to get another skill session in, or I need to play in another tournament, because you're going to develop your overall athletic skill set participating in other sports. And you're often going to find the sport that fits best for you, based on your athletic ceiling, right? I mean, the kids who are going to be professional athletes will probably get there one way or another. And so really ensuring that these kids are well-rounded throughout their development, I think, is very important.
Okay, so would there ever be a time to early specialize, in your opinion?
I mean, the sports where you see early specialization are most common, and where they probably are most successful are individualized sports like gymnastics and figure skating. My wife was a world championship level figure skater, right? And she even resisted it for a long time. She played soccer, she did taekwondo, but there was a point when she got to, 14 years old, where they were like, hey, you really need to dedicate yourself to this because of your talent. And these are sports that are very skill focused, and also from a anatomical adaptation focus. I think early on, specializing lends itself to these people being more successful. But on the other side of that, those are also sports where you see eating disorders. Those are also sports where you see big psychological problems. Those are also sports where you see huge overuse injuries. And so is that benefit worth it, is really the question. Because I know, speaking to my wife, I have a daughter who's 3 years old who actually started skating this past year. And my wife even said, like, I don't really want her to become a figure skater. I'd rather she be a hockey player, because of the constant pressure that she went through in her experience, even being extremely successful in her sport. And so it's one of those things where, on the other side of it, I think sometimes people who have been through it, the answer is very clear. Like, to my wife, I think if you told her when she was 14, hey, you need to continue to play multiple sports, she might have resisted because she saw the success that she was going to have. But now, looking back in hindsight, I think her answer would be very clear about, hey, I want my daughter to do as many different things as possible to take a little bit of pressure off of her in the long term.
Mm. Well, I think you bring up some really good stuff with the items that you listed of the pluses and minuses. My kids both did gymnastics at a young age. We kind of had the spaghetti at the wall, like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
see what sticks. But I loved gymnastics for them because they were at that young age, they were pulling, they were pushing, they were tumbling, they were single leg stuff. It
Mm-hmm.
was great. I mean, I was looking at it as a different lens than probably most
Yeah.
folks, where they were looking for ribbons. I was looking for like what it, just from a movement perspective. But so, in my opinion, the whole reason why I started this podcast was to educate people, because I truly think athletes, parents, coaches, even organizations don't necessarily realize the harm that they're doing, and or detriment they're not doing, almost. And so my question is, have you found any methods of education that work better than others for maybe all three categories of when you have your athletes in the facility, educating them as to being a multifaceted, or focus on the durability, the strength and conditioning side to support what they're doing. You spoke a little bit about the conversations with the parents. My biggest thing from a parent is, a parent will come in and say, I want you to kick my kid's ass, to which I like kind of look at them and I go, well, how about we just make them better?
Yeah.
And like that becomes like the start of my message to them. So what education strategies do you employ?
I do think it starts with heading it off the conversation exactly like how you said. We have the same thing where I'll have a hockey dad come in and say, hey, like we actually had a dad, I remember like last year say, he messaged us after a session and said the kids, they weren't like limping out of there and they weren't exhausted. And I'm like, yeah, I said, you could pay me to beat the hell out of your kid and make them tired, but that's not going to make them better. And getting them to understand that if you can give me 2 days a week of quality training that isn't going to crush them, and you can consistently do that for a long period of time. The conversation I always want to have is about consistency, because they want these microwave results. They want to say, hey, maybe I can. They'll say, oh, my kid can come for 8 weeks. And I'm like, okay, well, can he come for 52 weeks? Because that's much more what I think is going to make them successful. And I don't think they need to be in here 4 days a week. I don't think they need to be in here for more than an hour. And getting them to understand that, like small dosing of quality training goes a really long way. And that also allowing for periods of rest. I try to explain to them that, like, you don't get better from the work, you get better from recovering from the work. And that includes saying, hey, after you have a really hard, week where you have a lot of practice and a lot of training and maybe a game, allowing the kid to recover and eat and sleep, and allowing for those periods over time to consecutively grow. That's where you're going to see development. And it's hard even for parents to understand the idea of like delayed gratification, that like, listen, if this kid is going to start training with us at 12 or 13, um, you're going to really start to notice this stuff a couple of years down the road, not tomorrow and not next month. And being able to build trust with the kid and with the parent that you have their best interest in mind. And so I always say to our coaches here who maybe come to me and say, hey, I have this parent who's a little bit overbearing, and I'll say, like, you need to really double down on developing a relationship with that parent, because they don't know. And they always say, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, these parents think they're doing the right thing, right? And so getting them to build some rapport and trust with you, where you can say, hey, if you want, this is my perspective, that, hey, maybe don't play that summer league team, and you focus on training, and we don't need to go to every showcase, and we just consistently focus on participating in training, so that your kid can develop over time. If you build a relationship, they can start to listen to you. And it is a battle. Like, you're going to lose it sometimes to some parents who don't want to listen and kids who don't want to listen, but you have to continue to put your best foot forward and try to provide them that information as best you can.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you said about training. I mean, it's the consistent message. You just
Yeah.
consistently put it out there. What shifts in programming do you see and or employ as a youth athlete moves to middle school, to high school, to college, at the professional level? And I guess let me preface this by saying I I I want to, I guess, distinguish the difference. So when parents see what pros are doing,
Mm-hmm.
or an athlete sees what a pro is doing, where that all started.
Yes. I always say, like, our middle school program is like training class. I don't even call it lifting weights. Like I say, when you're coming to the middle school program, we're teaching you to do things the right way. I'm not concerned about how heavy they're lifting. I'm not concerned about the volume that they're getting. I'm concerned that they're getting repetitions. And if you look at our middle school program, it's extremely simple. There's lots of repetition. They're doing many of the same movements 2 days a week. Our warm up is the same both days, because they, in my mind, if these kids are with us for a 12-week session and they only, hang clean once a week, or they only a skip once per week, or they only squat once per week, they only get 12 exposures. If they do it twice a week, they get 24 exposures. It's just a simple repetition. And at that level, if we're not really concerned about load, these kids are going to get stronger doing anything, because their training ceiling is so low. we're trying to develop basic core competencies of, like you said, athletic development. Can they skip? Can they throw? Can they jump? Can they skip? Can they bound? Can they squat? Can they push? Can they pull? And then if you really dedicate to just developing really good looking quality training at a middle school age, by the time they get to the kind of that next level, these kids get into like our high school program, then they take off, because what happens is things do begin to intensify. Maybe 2 days goes to 3 days or 4 days for our more dedicated, high school to collegiate level athletes. And there's more variability in the program. The intensity is a little bit higher. And then you really start to see like these kids really stand out. Wow, they're stronger, they're faster, they're more durable than their peers. But they built all of that over a really basic program for a while. And like, that's really what we dedicate our middle school development program to, is just general athletic development. And then what I think a lot of people don't understand about professional sports is, when you look at our professional athletes, much of our job is about maintaining who they are and keeping them healthy. Because a lot of these guys and girls that we work with who are, professional hockey players, they're right about at their ceiling as far as performance goes, right? But we're trying to maybe get them up a tiny notches and just continue to get them to be able to play the next season and make it through the season, and like I get to the next contract, right? And a lot of our programming is, hey, okay, you come in, you have a history of a shoulder injury, like we're going to build your program this way, we're going to put in these specific exercises to ensure that your shoulder keeps feeling good, and then we develop your capacity everywhere else and maintain who you are, as opposed to dumping on tons of volume and load that likely will just fatigue them, because these athletes, when they come in from the following NHL season, like they're gassed, right? And it's a lot of restoration over the 3 months when they're with us in the summer, as opposed to, hey, us putting the pedal to the metal and really, really crushing them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it plays nicely into this next question, because when I had Dose and Coach Dose on, and Will Fleming, we spoke about the percentage of kids that went on from the Little League World Series to play in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
And the percent was so small, whether you made it or you didn't, that the emphasis on the Little League World Series had no bearing or
Yeah.
indication on your future.
Yeah.
When I posted a clip on social media about that, I got a ton of comments that we were like shitting on these kids because they made it to the Little League World Series. And I kept saying in response, that wasn't the point of the
Yeah.
clip. The point was that, you know, you don't have to just use that as a marker for the, let's say, the long-term success of your child.
Yeah.
And what you're saying in regard to the training, from what they do at the base level to such the shift in the pro level,
Mhm.
is that exact indication.
Yeah. And, I've seen the graphics. I've used that in a presentation before that shows like all the major sports, like the percentage of kids that go from middle school to high school to NCAA, and then NCAA up. And it just, the numbers are minuscule. And it's a great thing to show parents, to say, like, hey, this is the reality. And so, what I always tell our coaches is, like, we're developing qualities that have nothing to do with them being a professional athlete. It goes back to, there used to be an NCAA saying that said, there's, X amount of NCAA athletes, and all of them, the majority of them are going to go pro in something other than sports. And that's true for the kids that come to us. And I say, hey, are we teaching them to have great health habits and take care of themselves? Are we teaching them character? Are we teaching them to show up on time? Are we teaching them to put their sheet away and help the other kids in the group? That's what we're teaching. And remarkably, all of the parents say that we're one of the most positively impactful thing in their kids' lives from a developmental standpoint. And I would say to our coaches, like, you are the model for them. Very likely, a lot of these kids don't want to listen to their parents. They don't want to listen to their teachers. A lot of their sport coaches are much older than them. They don't relate to them. But our coaches here are all in their 20s. So to them, you're kind of cool. And you can be a model for them, and you can model them positive behavior, you can model them negative behavior. And I go back to that book, Inside Out Coaching by Joe Ehrman, which is a book we give to all of our employees, where he says, like, I think the quote is something like, sports are a perfect venue to build culture, but they only build culture if the coach has it, and character if the coach has it and intentionally teaches it. And so our job as performance enhancement specialists for kids is to develop great adults, right? They say coachable kids are employable adults. And so you have to think as a much bigger picture. Like, the majority of these kids you're going to work with won't even play a college sport. And so what are we really trying to develop for them is, one, a lifelong love of exercise and character skills. And those kids who are going to be college and professional athletes are going to be college and professional athletes. And so it's a good reminder for parents that, that we need to think about a little bit of a bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I had Mike on, we spoke about strength and conditioning as a multiplier. And my question for you is, can you think of examples of athletes that you've worked with or been around that exemplify that, whether it's a pro extending their career or a youth athlete not playing, let's say, on a competitive team as a kid, but because of strength and conditioning and because of, like you said, finding this lifelong, drive within the gym, they're playing in college potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can think of both ends of it. You can think of a kid like Jack Eichel, who came here, who was very clear at a young age that he was athletically better than everybody else. But you know what else he did? Chris Kreider, same thing. Both of these kids were head and shoulders above their peers from an athletic talent standpoint. But talk about a multiplier. If you take someone who's a 10 and they have a 10 work ethic, they're 100. That's from that genius of all of us, the idea that Mike was talking about. And look at both of their careers. NHL veterans, Jack Eichel likely are going to have a Hall of Fame level career, but he was a 10 and a 10. I've also seen kids who were 10 athletic skills who weren't consistent and didn't have great habits and didn't have great character skills. Who I can think of a kid that I know who was a standout, who, he had a cup of coffee in the NHL and he was gone. And you think, like, oh man, like, but you see that. And then on the other end, I have kids that I've worked with who they weren't exceedingly talented, but these are kids that came from 11 or 12 years old. Their parents had them here every session, 2 to 4 days a week, all the way from middle school through high school. And I have kids who end up with a 4-year scholarship to go play a sport at a school that their parents would have never been able to pay for them to go to. And then these kids have a good college career and they get out and they have a job because, being a collegiate athlete does lend itself to finding a job in the market and going to a better school. And so you're opening up opportunities for these kids that are outside of just having sports. And we see it all the time that we have kids that, like, hey, they might not have been a collegiate athlete, but we maybe take them up a notch. Like you said, you multiply maybe a kid who is a 6 from an athletic development standpoint to a 60, and then all of a sudden he's playing Division II hockey or Division II basketball or lacrosse. And I was trying to make clear to the parents, they get very focused on this Division I idea. And I say, do you know how hard it is to be a Division II athlete or even a Division III athlete in some sports? It's a high dedication activity. And a very small percentage of kids actually achieve that. And so, again, not being so focused on this kid has to play a Division I sport, but this kid is going to be successful and have opportunities because of the work that they did from a athletic development standpoint.
Okay, so if you could design a culture, environment, program, league that supported long-term athletic development, what would it look like? What would, like, the non-negotiables be at the various stages?
Yeah, I think that you have to have people at the top of whatever club sports organization is that aren't only focused on profit, because every time they can add a tournament, every time they can add a showcase, they can make more money, right? And so you have to have people at the top who generally think like, hey, what is going to be the best for us to develop the best athletes and the most well-rounded athletes? And then also educate to the parents, because they'll get pressure from the parents. They're like, oh, I heard this club is playing in this tournament or this club's traveling to here. You have to have people at the top who are dedicated to that and are going to make strength and conditioning part of the program. And we are with some good organizations and club sports programs who they work our program into the cost of signing up for their club hockey team or their club soccer team. And that's part of it. And so like we have this local soccer organization where every kid comes with us 2 days a week and then they go to practice after. And it's just, if you sign up, that's what you're getting. Right. And it's compulsory. And so you have to have people who are thinking like, hey, although this might mean this kid's not, practicing for an extra hour 2 days a week, it means he's developing himself 2 days a week and thinking of it in that way. And so it is hard because you're battling the natural tendency of these clubs to want to make money rather than provide a holistic service for the kids.
What are you excited about in the state of the health and fitness industry currently or in the foreseeable future?
I do think there's a lot more conversation about long-term athletic development, much more because there has been problems. And I think, unfortunately, it takes overuse injuries, it takes burnout, and all of those things to start to open up people's eyes. But when I was really, like I said, I saw 2 clips this past week of both Gronk and Nick Saban saying like that's what you want, and I think you need more people at the top of sports to continue to parrot that message out for people. I mean, the great thing is privatized strength conditioning facilities like your business and our business are much more common than they used to be. So there are resources out there for parents, and I think that there's the strength and conditioning coach in general. If you talk to most strength coaches, they agree with our perspective that hey, kids need to have well-rounded development, and so it's just I think that there's always going to be a growing privatization culture that is going to be present, but I think that you're hearing more and more people like us just having conversations like this that hopefully parents and kids and other coaches hear and continue to spread that message. And so I think if you said, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was probably less of that. And so my hope is that it continues that direction.
Hmm. What are you most concerned about?
Again, you do see a lot of these high cost academies that are attracting people and attracting kids to commit early to a life in sports and like this kind of academy model. And I think it's problematic, but I also think that it creates in this elitist culture in sports where most people can't afford that. And so I think in our society overall, this is a bigger commentary, there is this kind of elitist divide that has continued to happen. And I think you're going to have, a lot of, a small percentage of the population that can spend a lot of money on resources for their children to play sports. And you're going to have a much larger segment of the population that's growing that probably is priced out of participating in especially expensive sports like hockey, where access is a really big problem for kids who can't buy equipment, can't buy ice time, can't pay for tournaments and leagues and play on these teams. And what you're seeing fall off is the participation in school-based sports, right? More and more kids are opting out if they have the money to not play on their high school team. And that's a problem because those teams need funding from the taxpayer base. They need funding from sports fees through the schools for them to go on. And so I just think we're seeing a divide that reflects the divide that's happening overall economically, at least in the United States. And I think that leads to more and more kids being priced out of participating in those sports.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about this divide, and I I genuinely think that it is the biggest issue we face for long-term athletic development.
Mm-hmm.
And to expand on that, I think it's this us versus them mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's at like a macro level of an organization, or it's at more of a micro level of you know my gym's better than your gym, or our club knows more than your high school, or the PE teachers don't know what they're talking about, or it's this like back and forth. Really, if I had to sum it up, it comes down to ego. One word,
Yeah.
ego. So have you faced this, and what's been your approach to this us versus them?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you do see that the butting of heads, especially between municipal based sports like from schools and private organizations. And again, what's getting lost in it is the kids, uh, and that these kids want to play sports with their friends. These kids want to compete and have fun. Secondarily to these private organizations marketing and advertising and promoting themselves. And so again, we need to continue to put a message out that just get out there and play and find where you're happy and find where you can compete and find where you can continue to better yourself, and don't worry so much about being like, I need to be on this team or this select team or this travel team, because once you start chasing that, it never ends. It's a hamster wheel where you're always going to the next one.
Mm,
And so I think you have to, as a parent, look hard at your kid and say, hey, what makes them happy and what's going to make sure that they're successful, as opposed to listening to all the noise that's often out there from all of these other sources.
yeah. Is there a one or multiple golden nuggets you would like to leave us with that either we have addressed or we haven't addressed to I guess to leave us with?
Yeah, I just think that, I mean, this 20-year window idea of like, if you're a performance coach listening to this or a sport coach listening to this, like, you don't understand the impact you can have on a kid 10, 20 years down the road. Again, you can become hyper focused on whoever the best kid is and being like, I need to develop this kid, or get this team over the top. And what you don't realize is we have a huge segment of our population of kids who train with us in our middle school program who this is their physical activity. They don't really play a sport, right? And you look at the group and like, you look at these kids and you think like, okay, yeah, that kid definitely doesn't even play he's trying to fight to get on his JV team, much less a varsity team. And we need to coach and treat these kids all the same across the entire spectrum. I want the kid who is in fear of getting cut from his freshman team to get the same level of coaching and attention and care as the kid who is the wonderkind in youth hockey. Because what that kid might say 10, 20 years down the line is, wow, that experience really changed my life and turned me on to exercising. My thing that really makes me feel good is when I have kids who are in our middle school group, I've been here long enough now, who end up becoming employees, who end up becoming interns, who end up going into this as a career because of the positive experience they had with us. Not kids that go on to necessarily be professional athletes. I'm most proud of the ones that thought like, wow, they thought this was such a cool place for me to come as a kid that I want to work here. And I think about my own experience, bringing it full circle. Like, I had a really good experience with people who mentored me when I was, at that age, that I thought like, wow, that's what I want to do for a career. And so you don't know as a coach who those people are necessarily going to be. You try to think big picture about that, but it's hard. So I think you have to kind of think critically about, how am I treating everyone that comes in here? Because long term, you could change a lot of lives, and it might not be in the way that you originally thought.
Excellent. I love that. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Well, look, I really appreciate what you have shared today and the messages and the answers to the questions. I really would stress to everybody that is listening, watching, the answers that Kevin spoke about are from utter experience. This is not, something that he saw on Instagram or, on social media that has been manipulated in any way, shape, or form. This is real world experience, and he's the author of Functional Training Anatomy, the co-founder of the Certified Functional Strength Coach, and the partner at MBSC and Movement is Medicine. You're talking about hundreds of hours of experience. So again, Kev, I really appreciate it. I think that there's great value in it, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you for having me on.
All right.